You being the attractive woman on that show, are you allowed to go outside your apartment, or is it dangerous? Are they just...
We don't have apartments.
You know...
She was once voted one of the sexiest women on television, plastered across magazine covers around the world, and then, right at the height of her fame, she simply disappeared. No messy scandal, no tabloid meltdown. She just walked away from Hollywood and never really came back. So what actually happened to Jolene Blalock, the actress behind Star Trek, Enterprise's sub-commander T'Pol? The answer says a lot more about her than it does about the industry she left behind. Before any of that, Blalock's path to Enterprise wasn't the typical Hollywood story. She grew up in San Diego, and in her late teens she left home to work as an international model in Europe and Asia. It was only after returning to the United States that she started training as an actress, studying at the Stella Adler Academy and taking improv classes with Second City in both Toronto and Los Angeles. Her first credited acting role came in 1998, in a guest spot on the sitcom Veronica's Closet, and she followed that with a lead role in the made-for-television movie Jason and the Argonauts in 2000, alongside veteran actors Dennis Hopper and Frank Langella. None of that pointed obviously toward Star Trek, but it gave her just enough screen experience to walk into one of the biggest casting decisions in the franchise's history. When Star Trek Enterprise launched in September 2001, it was carrying real weight. This was the fifth live-action series in the franchise, and instead of pushing further into the future, it rewound the clock a full century before Captain Kirk, back to humanity's first steps into deep space. The idea was a scrappier, less polished Starfleet, still figuring things out. For that kind of story to work, the writers needed a character who represented everything humans weren't yet: composed, logical, and centuries ahead in experience. That job fell to a Vulcan, and the actress cast to play her was a 26-year-old former model named Jolene Blalock. Playing a Vulcan on Star Trek is its own kind of pressure test. Ever since Leonard Nimoy created Spock in the 1960s, fans had an almost instinctive sense of what a Vulcan should look and sound like. The raised eyebrow, the flattened emotion, a mind working furiously under a completely still surface. Get it wrong and diehard fans notice immediately. Blalock didn't just clear that bar, she made the role her own, finding a middle ground between robotic stiffness and genuine internal tension. Her T'Pol felt like someone constantly working to process and tolerate the chaos of the human crew around her, without ever losing her composure on the surface. As the ship's science officer and eventually first officer, T'Pol worked closely with Captain Jonathan Archer, played by Scott Bakula, already familiar to audiences from Quantum Leap. Archer was impulsive and instinctive, the classic explorer figure, while T'Pol represented caution and the accumulated wisdom of an older civilization. That contrast wasn't just a personality quirk, it was the engine of the show. Enterprise was fundamentally about two cultures learning to trust each other, and the friction between Archer's urgency and T'Pol's detachment gave that theme somewhere to live every week. Audiences responded fast. Blalock became the breakout star of the ensemble, and critics noticed too. In 2002, she won a Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actress on Television for her performance, along with a Cinescape Genre Face of the Future Award, and she picked up further Saturn nominations in the 2 seasons that followed. For a while, T'Pol wasn't just a supporting character, she was one of the biggest reasons people tuned in. It also helped that she wasn't carrying the show alone. Around her was a tight ensemble that grounded the more sensational marketing in something believable. Connor Trinneer played Chief Engineer Charles "Trip" Tucker, and the slow, complicated dynamic between Trip's warmth and T'Pol's restraint became one of the show's most talked-about relationships. Dominic Keating played the buttoned-up Armory officer Malcolm Reed, Anthony Montgomery played helmsman Travis Mayweather, and John Billingsley became a fan favorite as the eccentric alien Dr. Phlox. Linda Park, meanwhile, brought a different kind of vulnerability to the bridge as communications officer Hoshi Sato, a character openly frightened of space travel, which made her one of the more human, relatable figures on a ship full of pioneers. Together, that cast spent long, demanding days in heavy makeup and prosthetics, and by most accounts formed a genuinely close bond off-camera that helped carry the show through its rockier stretches. That popularity came with strings attached, though. UPN, the network airing Enterprise, was struggling for ratings and desperate to pull in younger viewers, and executives leaned hard into marketing Blalock as a sex symbol. She landed on the covers of men's magazines like FHM, Maxim, and Stuff, and was repeatedly named to hottest lists in entertainment media. That marketing bled directly into the show. Unlike her human castmates in standard Starfleet uniforms, T'Pol was dressed in tight-fitting catsuits, and the series became known for its so-called decontamination scenes, where crew members rubbed antibacterial gel on each other under blue lighting after away missions. The scenes were technically justified by the plot, but the lingering camera work made the real intention pretty hard to miss. Blalock was open about her frustration with this. In interviews during and after the show's run, she pushed back on the idea that T'Palla's value was in how she looked rather than what she brought to the story. She argued more than once that the character's real strength was her intelligence and her internal conflict between logic and buried emotion, not her wardrobe. And to her credit, despite the network's instincts, she managed to build a character arc with real depth over 4 seasons, one that touched on addiction, cultural prejudice, grief, and the toll of constantly suppressing emotion. By the later seasons, T'Pol was widely regarded as one of the more layered characters in the franchise. Then, in spring 2005, after just 4 seasons, Enterprise was cancelled. For longtime fans, this wasn't a small event. It marked the end of an unbroken 18-year run of Star Trek shows stretching back to The Next Generation in 1987. For Blalock personally, the ending was messy in a different way. The series finale, These Are the Voyages, framed the entire story of Enterprise as a holodeck simulation being watched by characters from The Next Generation, sidelining Blalock's crew in their own finale, killing off a major character, and rushing through years of relationship development involving T'Pol. Blalock didn't hold back. In press interviews at the time, she publicly called the finale appalling, and said it felt like an insult to both the cast and the fans who had stuck with the show, an unusually blunt thing for an actor to say about their own network, and it made headlines of its own. After that, Blalock made a choice that surprised people who follow Hollywood careers. Rather than jumping straight into pilot season the way most actors coming off a cancelled series tend to do, she stepped back almost entirely. She largely avoided the Star Trek convention circuit too, usually one of the most reliable things a former franchise actor can do for years after a show ends, both financially and for keeping their name in front of longtime fans. Part of that was reportedly discomfort with some of the more intense fan attention during the show's run, particularly given how heavily her physical appearance had already been marketed by the network. But the bigger part of the story is what was happening in her personal life at exactly the same time. While filming the 2nd season of Enterprise, Blalock met Michael Rapino, a Canadian music industry executive based in England at the time, working in international concert promotion. Despite living on opposite sides of the world for much of their early relationship, the two got serious quickly. In April 2003, on a family vacation in Negril, Jamaica, Blalock proposed to Rapino, and the two were married on the beach that same trip. It wasn't a typical Hollywood romance, and it didn't play out in front of cameras. As Enterprise was winding down in 2005, Rapino's career was taking off. He went on to become CEO of Live Nation, which grew into the largest live entertainment and ticketing company in the world, giving the couple a level of financial security few actors ever get from acting alone. Together they had 3 sons, and by most accounts built a deliberately private family life, well outside the celebrity spotlight. Blalock and Rapino also founded the Rapino Foundation, a charitable organization supporting communities in the developing world, and Blalock has long been a supporter of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, in addition to being known as an avid animal lover. That combination of financial stability and a growing family meant she was never in a position where she needed to take a role just to pay the bills, which is a kind of freedom very few working actors ever actually get to have. None of this means Blalock quit acting completely though, which is a common misconception. Her career slowed significantly after Enterprise, but it didn't stop. She made a memorable 2-episode appearance on Stargate SG-1 as Ishta, a Jaffa resistance leader, giving her a chance to play something far more physical than T'Pol. She took guest roles on major network shows too, appearing in an episode of CSI Miami and later playing a recurring character named Lexa on House. On the fantasy side, she had a run as the villainous sorceress sister Nikki on Legend of the Seeker, and in 2009 she leaned into self-parody, appearing as an exaggerated version of herself on the comedy series 10 Items or Less, in an episode built around a sci-fi convention. In film, Blalock took a noticeably darker turn. She co-starred opposite Ray Liotta in the 2005 neo-noir thriller Slow Burn, followed by the horror thriller Shadow Puppets in 2007. In 2008 she returned to science fiction as Captain Lola Beck in Starship Troopers 3, Marauder, putting her back in a leadership role on a spaceship, just in a very different universe than the one that made her famous, and one that let cult sci-fi fans see her back in command without any of the baggage that came with T'Pol. She also appeared in the action drama Sinners and Saints, the independent drama One Kind Day, and had a small role in the 2014 comedy Sex Tape alongside Cameron Diaz and Jason Segel. Her most recent live-action credit before a long gap was the 2017 television movie A Man for Every Month, a romantic comedy in which she played a supporting role. For a long stretch after that, Blalock stayed almost entirely out of the public eye acting-wise. Then in September 2021 she made a surprise appearance at Paramount's official Star Trek Day celebration, walking the red carpet alongside former castmates for the first time in years, a small moment that signaled her relationship with the franchise had never really been severed, just quieted. The bigger surprise came a few years later. In December 2024 Star Trek Lower Decks aired an episode called Fisher Quest, a multiverse-spanning crossover that brought back several legacy Star Trek actors playing alternate versions of their old characters. Almost no one saw it coming, but Jolene Blalock returned to voice an alternate universe version of T'Pol, credited simply as Jolene. According to the show's creator, Mike McMahon, bringing her back involved a genuine, respectful outreach process, including a personal letter explaining how much her original performance had shaped how the writers approached Vulcan characters going forward. Fans and critics who watched the episode largely agreed her voice work slipped right back into the character almost 20 years later, as if no time had passed at all. So where does that leave the actual answer to the question people keep asking? Jolene Blalock didn't get pushed out of the industry, and she isn't hiding from some falling out. She built a life that simply didn't require her to keep showing up on red carpets or chasing pilot season every year. She has financial security through her family, a foundation that lets her put real time into philanthropic work, 3 kids she's raised largely outside the spotlight, and a body of work she can look back on with some pride, even the parts of it she was openly critical of at the time. She still shows up when something feels meaningful to her, like a fan convention appearance, a Star Trek Day carpet, or a Lower Decks episode written specifically to honor the characters she created, and she stays away from the rest. Looking back at Enterprise now from a couple of decades' distance, the show itself has aged better than its ratings at the time suggested it would. When it premiered, the pilot episode pulled in more than 12 million viewers, UPN's best premiere numbers in years, but that early enthusiasm was hard to sustain. The show struggled against a shifting television landscape and heavy-handed network interference, including the infamous decision to swap the traditional orchestral opening for a pop-rock theme song, and it never fully escaped comparisons to the Star Trek shows that came before it. But its long-form storytelling, particularly the year-long Shindy arc in Season 3 and the deeper world-building in Season 4 under showrunner Manny Coto, has picked up a lot more respect from fans and critics who rediscovered it on streaming years later, long after weekly ratings stopped matching. Some of that same reassessment has extended to the cast around Blalock too, including Linda Park's performance as Hoshi Sato, which many fans feel deserved more room to grow than the writers ever gave it. At the center of all of that was Blalock's performance, one that took a character explicitly designed to hide her feelings and somehow made her one of the most emotionally memorable people on the ship. She played T'Pol through addiction storylines, cultural conflict, loss, and a slow-burning relationship with the crew's chief engineer, all while publicly pushing back against a network that too often seemed more interested in her wardrobe than her character's inner life. That combination, real talent paired with real honesty about the industry around her, is probably the most consistent thread running through her entire career. It's also worth pointing out that her return in Fisher Quest wasn't a one-off nod for nostalgia's sake. The episode leaned into the multiverse premise to give returning legacy actors, including Alexander Siddig, Andrew Robinson, Garrett Wang, and Alfre Woodard, actual character moments rather than just cameo appearances. For Blalock specifically, the alternate reality version of T'Pol she voiced was noticeably older than the character audiences remembered from Enterprise, reflecting a version of the timeline where she'd lived a long life alongside Trip Tucker, giving longtime fans a small, quiet sense of closure for a relationship the original finale had rushed through. In the end, Jolene Blalock's story isn't really about disappearing at all. It's about someone who reached one of the biggest stages in science fiction television, said exactly what she thought about how that stage was run, and then chose deliberately what her life would look like after the cameras stopped rolling. Whether or not she ever steps back in front of a camera again, her 4 seasons as T'Pol, and that unexpected, quietly perfect return to the role in 2024, have already secured her a permanent place in Star Trek history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what happened to Jolene Blalock, let me know in the comments which other Star Trek actor's story you'd like covered next, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.